So good afternoon, everyone. Now, where did we stop the last time? The French Revolution, right? Okay, Reign of Terror and timeline. Did we write down the causes of the French Revolution? No, but we discussed the causes, right? We discussed the causes, the three estates, the unequal taxation system, the guild system, the failure of the guild system, all of that, right? So it would be a revision for you also. And that we'll first write down the causes of the French Revolution. We have already discussed that, but we'll write down, so it would be a revision also for you. If you have any doubts, we'll take that. And then we'll take forward the other discussions. Okay, that is principally around the issues of the rise of Napoleon, the factors that facilitated the rise of Napoleon, and the period from 1794 onwards till 1815 and the Congress of Vienna. So today we'll complete the French Revolution, and from the next class onwards we'll talk about other things. Now, as Nachiket sir was talking to you about some questions and all, right? Now, basically, if you actually see, I mean, if you see, for example, the history question paper also, I mean, the modern Indian history questions, the questions are, I mean, almost fairly direct. If you've read it, there is no vacillation around. If you've read it, you'll be able to answer. The only thing, at least to my surprise, normally if you see the past 3 or 4 years question papers, there's always one or the other bouncer. Okay, at least in modern Indian history, but this time there wasn't. Except in modern Indian history. In world history, yes, there was. I mean, for example, if I gave you the list of topics, none of that came in world history. Okay, there was one question only, and that is from the Malay Peninsula, which in all likelihood you're not going to do in terms of writing a really good answer. So one of the things also is that even as one looks at even this year's question papers, what you need to ensure is that you will find any question paper where 20 out of 20 questions. It doesn't happen that way. Okay, but at least if you are decently well prepared, you will find that every question paper you will be able to answer either in a good manner or in an average manner, somewhere around 17, 18 questions out of 20. And even on the one or two which you do not have fairly a good idea about, you can still be writing something and not leaving it completely blank. Okay, so I mean that is the whole strategy when you're preparing. As long as you are writing good or average answers about questions that you know, and probably just writing something also on topics that you have no idea about, you are in the good zone. Okay. That's the whole strategy. The strategy is not to always look at a question paper and see out of 20 questions, oh, I didn't know anything about these 1 or 2 questions out of 20. The main emphasis is that if you're doing the rest 18 properly, and even writing one or something, or even if you're leaving 1 or 2 questions, but you're writing 18 properly, that's good enough. I mean, there's a reason why the cutoff is out of 2100, not 1600, not 1800, right? So, I mean, don't always be unrealistic. कि sir, ये एक चीज थी जो हमने नहीं पढ़ी, यही आई है. What about the rest that you can focus upon realistically? Why I'm also saying this is because whenever you see, because I have always seen this, that whenever you're looking, from your syllabus point of view, we often tend to focus upon, I mean, it's something that's in psychology called the Zeigarnik effect. Okay, that basically incomplete things are better remembered. If I tell you to look at a question paper for 20 questions, and I then ask you something about the question paper, you are most likely to remember things which you don't know. It's called Zeigarnik effect in psychology, because the mind always tends to remember something which is incomplete, okay, or something that you are not familiar or comfortable with. Okay, and that is why, for example, the Zeigarnik effect is a very powerful effect in cognitive psychology and considered an important development. So always, be aware of this bias, that rather than focusing on 1 or 2 questions, say, or 5 questions out of 100, say in the prelims examination that you had no clue about, the cutoff is still 55%. And that's because of the reason that whatever you know solidly, don't do a mistake in that. Okay, and for example, if you see, there's a question, one of the first questions in modern Indian history in your paper one is from the first PowerPoint presentation, which is given line by line. That's the last line. That the 18th century Mughal India was not an age of overall decline. It was a period dominated by a variety of regional entities. That's the question. 150 marks question. The third question was that 18th century India was marked by a number of regional entities. Discuss. That we talked about so many times, that it is the decline of the British, it is the decline of the Mughals, and followed by the rise of the British. But the period of 100 to 150 years between the decline of the Mughals and the rise of the British is marked by a number of regional players. Those who were either the successor of the Mughals or were autonomous players in their own right. The successors were states like Hyderabad, states like Bengal. The autonomous were the states like Marathas and Mysore. Utna hi likhna tha, 150 words is what the question was about. So again, you see that even if you're sticking to what you're doing, but you're doing it properly and you're building the connections, that's good enough. Okay. And for example, we talked about communalism, right? Communalism and partition. There's a question, 250 marks, 250 words question, 15 marker question on, again, regional religiosity and communalism. And if you remember, we discussed that how Jinnah was a communal individual, but not a religious individual, right? So again, and we pointed out that religiosity has got nothing to do with communalism. So that's, again, that's nobody's, it's not that we are, probably envisioning the future or anything. It's just written in the same books, okay? But what you should not be doing is looking in books, because that's what we have done, right? You just focus on what is being done and build the interlinkages. As long as, for example, you can say that's a question on tribal issues also, right? What are the two landmark legislations to end tribal discrimination, right? Now, I discussed with you PESA and FRA. If most of the people you would talk to, they would say that PESA and FRA is what had to be written about. But it's not, one can have different interpretations also. One can also say that the SC/STs Atrocities Act is one of the major ones. And one can think of these as well. So, whatever two that you're thinking of, it's important that you justify them with an explanation why these are the landmark ones. There's no answer. Government of India has never said in any document that these are the two landmark legislations. Okay? Whatever you write, you justify that. And I told you, right, they're themes. So tribals, I told you, there was a theme. You can expect a question. So again, you see a question. Now, it's not about exactly, for example, basic questions like moderates, there was a question on the moderates, the limitations as well as the ideas of the moderates. I told you, women, though paper essay, there's one topic on women essay. There's the question on 19th century social reform movements of women, right? And the organizations that worked in, again, a straightforward question. So again, as long as you're looking at the patterns and you're working, you'll be able to see themes, and themes are repeated, questions are not repeated. Okay. So work on the themes. And also one thing again I'm emphasizing, always, okay, if you see, for example, this year, there's just one question on world history. Okay. Now, if there's one question on world history, and last year, for the last 2-3 years, you're seeing there are less questions from world history and post-independence history. I'm telling you, the day you lower your guard, that is the next year they'll throw more questions from there. Okay. That's how they do it. Okay. That for a couple of years, there were more questions from art and culture. Now this year, there were very few questions from art and culture. The very next year, you'll see the same thing. So the point is, don't lower your guard. Do basics in topics which are relatively low yield. Do those topics in and out which are relatively high yield. So in history, do modern Indian history very, very thoroughly. Do the basics of world history, post-independence history, so that if a basic question comes, you don't miss out on it. Okay. If there's a bouncer, it's okay. But if there's a basic question, you don't miss out on it. That's the whole strategy of what you need to do. And that applies to every paper. Okay. Now, so just keep that much in mind, and you'll find that a lot of things get covered, provided you are paying attention, not just to what is being taught in the class, but what is being said, but not written. Okay. Because everything cannot be written. And nobody can envision while saying this must be written because this is going to come. But be a bit more attentive and try to build linkages. It's going to happen. Okay. Now, let's come to the whole French Revolution thing. Within the French Revolution, let's write down the causes of the French Revolution. So, when we talk about the causes of the French Revolution, firstly are the political causes. The Bourbon, just a second. The Bourbon dynasty was an absolute monarchy whose rulers were known for the lavish lifestyles and wasteful expenditures that fueled resentment against the monarchy. Similarly, the other major point that we had discussed before was what? Was the expensive nature of the financing of the American Revolution, right? So the second point was the financing of the American Revolution had a significant, okay, the financing, you can write down, the financing of the American Revolution had a significant negative impact, on the financial health of the French Empire, which made it imperative or necessary, to raise taxes to decrease the national debt, DEBT, to decrease the national debt. Okay, so that's the second point that we've written, and that's another political cause. Now, in terms of the economic causes, France was under repeated droughts and famines during 1780s France was under repeated droughts and famines during 1780s due to the absence, due to the absence of any major increase in agricultural productivity. Due to absence of any major increase in agricultural productivity and low rainfall. This led to high inflation and food shortages. Second major economic cause was the highly unequal nature of the taxation system under the highly unequal nature of taxation system under the French rule, where the first and second estate which together owned 60% of the national wealth, but constituted nearly 2% of the national income of the 2% of the population, were not taxed at all. The burden of taxation fell completely on the third estate, which was already dealing with inflation and high prices, which was already dealing with inflation and high prices. Okay, so that's another important, economic reason for the revolt. Now, so the unequal and also the third economic reason. Okay, write that in the social reason. Now, the social reasons. The guild system was one which restricted the entry of new individuals into a particular profession, making it contingent upon the making it contingent upon the permission of the existing guild members, which was rarely granted. So what was the result? Thus, the guilds failed to keep up with the demand and restricted and socially restricted the rights of individuals to practice a profession of their and restricted the rights of individuals to practice a profession of their choice. Okay, so that was a social problem. Also, I told you that Napoleon could rise within the French army only after the French Revolution because that's the second major point of social causes. The higher positions within the French administrative structure, the higher positions within the French administrative structure were exclusively restricted to the first and second estates. And thus were exclusively restricted only to the first and second estates, and thus the third estates were deprived of these high paying and socially valued positions. The last point of social issues was the absence of any rule of law. The upper classes could obtain the letter of indulgences from the church, could obtain the letter of indulgences from the church letter of indulgences from the church, and thus could escape punishment upon payment of a small fine, even for heinous crimes. Okay. So all of these are considered as the major political, social, economic. And one thing that you can write down about the causes of the army also is, और देखिए हर जगह चाहे अमेरिकन हो चाहे फ्रेंच हो चाहे कोई रेवोल्यूशन हो, you can also always write about ideological influences, Locke, Rousseau, Voltaire, all of those. Okay. So, for example, as I told you before, also as Napoleon said that without Rousseau, there would have been no French Revolution, because he's the one who's talking about social contract and all of that. right? So those ideas जो हमने शुरू में बात किया है, right, in the first lecture, they can be written at the cause everywhere. So I'm not writing that again and again. It does not make sense. Last point that you can write about the army. And then I'll tell you one more thing about the question papers. See, there's one thing that I've seen in question papers. Over years, it's always easy to sit on this side and say, कि अरे ये तो बहुत आसान है, right? But that is not how it feels when you're writing it, because of 2 or 3 reasons. Firstly, time management is a very big issue. Secondly, for everybody to say that, oh, this is very easy when you just have to read one thing. When you have to read a lot, and that too in a span when you've just written 6 hours a day before, and then you have to write 6 hours again, it's a bigger challenge. So it's not, it's just one thing. All things viewed in isolation, are very relatively easy to do. But when put together, it becomes a bigger challenge. So it's not just the challenge of knowing, it's also the challenge of producing it within those hours. Okay, that itself is a big challenge. Okay, and in fact, I've personally met a lot of intelligent people not making it through the exam, and a lot of people who were never very so-called considered intelligent, but made it through the exam. So the exam is not a pure correlation of your understanding and the result. It also depends on many other things. Whether you are simulating, whether you are understanding that the need of the exam is just not knowing, but also writing, also producing in it in a manner that other can understand. It may be true that, and I've also frankly come across some amazingly exceptional people in this field who came to prepare, but who opted out after a point of time because they felt that that's not happening for them. Okay, and they probably went to other pastures. Okay, one of the things that you need to understand is that just because you have done well in life till here before does not mean that the exam is bound to reward you. And the opposite is also true. Just because you have not done well in life till now in academics before does not mean that this exam is not going to reward you. In fact, what this exam demands, one thing is preciseness. Just जो पूछा गया है उतना लिखिए. Now you need to write something amazing. Now you need to, doubt yourself. Oh, I've just written 4 points. If you're just writing 4 points also in every question, you're doing a wonderful job. Okay. So the exam does not want brilliance from you. It wants above average, not brilliance, and that must be replicated in all the papers. Any paper, देखिए UPSC का बड़ा simple fund है. If any paper goes bad for you, you cannot compensate in other papers. The idea is you do average every paper, and if you do 1 or 2 papers good, you'll get selected. If you do bad, कि मैं 1 or 2 पे नहीं focus करता हूँ, 3, 4 ऐसे ethics में मैं cover कर लूँगा. That's not how it happens. Average level of knowledge is required across papers, and even if you do ethics or essay or your optional, or even if 1 or even 2, if you do 2, then it's amazing. But even if you do 1 as an exceptional paper, that itself is enough. Okay, so what you need to know is just consistency is important. Don't leave any topic. Okay, ये एक बहुत मैंने देखा है. Don't leave any topic. There may be topics that you're not very happy about doing, but do the bare minimum. Okay, so that must be the strategy, and focus, as I always tell, more on ethics, essay and optional. उतना करिए, और बाकी जितना क्लास में देखिए, मैं very frank, what I'm doing in the class may not always be rewarding, but if you are not doing that, then you are definitely at a loss. And if you're doing this much, and if you can't answer, many others won't be able to answer. So that is where you don't need to sweat it out on. Sweat it out on areas where you know you are good. Okay, and that is where you focus upon. And the role of coming to a coaching is only this, कि उतना करिए जिस topic पे, for example, post-independence history, whatever Smriti ma'am teaches, बस ठीक है. Why? There's not much which is coming. If it comes from this, well and good. नहीं आता है तो ठीक है, right? Nobody will be able to answer. But आप post-independence पे you reading a book, उससे अच्छा ethics के लिए पढ़ लीजिए, essay के लिए पढ़ लीजिए, या optional के लिए पढ़ लीजिए. Okay, so rationalize your preparation in this manner, because enthusiasm is good, but unrealistic expectations from yourself also is wrong. कि मैं इसकी भी book पढ़ लूँगा, इसकी भी पढ़ लूँगा. Okay. Now, the last point on the army that you can write, and there are causes related to the army. Or the causes related to the army, not just armed structure, was the French soldiers who fought along their American counterparts in the American Revolution argued, the American Revolution in 1776, argued that similar ideas must be replicated in France as well. General, whatever you want to call him, General Lafayette was a key leader in French army who assumed an important leadership position within the French Revolution. So you see that the army, apart from also brought these ideas and assumed leadership position, and a part of the army defected in favor of the revolutionaries when they were sent to crush the uprising also. So that's also a causes related to the army. And there was also discontent also partly within the army due to non-payment of salaries on time within the French army, because the French army already was, the French were already under a huge debt. Now, the next thing to keep in mind, the next topic that we're going to talk about today is firstly the period of Napoleonic Wars. And that's something that we're going to talk about. The first coalition, the second coalition, the third and the fourth. And then, and we'll write down it in the form of a timeline. And then we'll discuss about the Congress of Vienna, the rise factors which facilitated the rise of Napoleon, Napoleon's policies. So we have a good amount of thing to cover. So we'll go beyond 5 today. So now, basically, so now you can draw the timeline with me. (1792) to 1797 is what is called as the period of first coalition or European coalition, one and the same thing. First coalition or European coalition, ये क्या है? First, second, third, fourth European coalitions are 4 times during Napoleon's period from 1790s to 1850s, where the French, the French neighbors like Austria, like Prussia, like Britain, like Russia were at war with France. 4 times, 4 major ones were there. First, second, third and fourth. And you see that this constant period from 1790s to 1850s, till Napoleon was there, he kept Europe always on the run. Okay, so it was till Napoleon was there in France, he made it difficult for anybody to settle down. Okay, so you see that 1792 to 1797 is the period of the first coalition or the first European coalition. And what is happening at this point of time? You remember we talked about the Battle of, we had talked about the Battle of Leipzig. No, we have not talked about. Okay. Okay, so we've not talked about, okay. So then, but we talked about the declaration of Pillnitz, yes, right? So the declaration, yes. Okay, Declaration of Pillnitz, I know I have talked about. Okay, so the Declaration of Pillnitz is something that we talked about, and the Declaration of Pillnitz, what we discussed was that the French ruler at this point of time, Louis the 16th, was the one who was sought to be reinstated in France, primarily by the Austrians and the Prussians. And the Austrians and Prussians declared that they would overthrow the French revolution and they would reinstate the monarchy. That is what the Declaration of Pillnitz was. Now, soon after this declaration, you see that Austria and Prussia decide to launch a joint war against, they decided to launch a joint war against the French. And this is the period from 1792 to 1797 where you see a constant period of war fighting. Napoleon is the one, is the key French general who plays a very important role in the French defending themselves against the Prussians and Austrians, okay, who had decided to overthrow the French Revolution. And that is why from 1792 itself, Napoleon started becoming an important figure within the French military, as well as was seen as one of the strong protectors of the French Revolution. Okay, so the period of the First Coalition saw repeated attempts by neighbors of France especially Austria and Prussia. So basically attacks by neighbors of France, Austria and Prussia to overthrow the Republic and reinstate the monarchy in France. However, Napoleon played a key role in defending the French Revolution during this period against external aggression. In 1795, what you see is a code of directory was formed. See, the monarchy had been overthrown, but it was yet to be decided what would be the structure of rule in France. And in the intervening period, they appointed that because there was no consensus whether presidential form, prime ministerial form, which form of government is to be brought in, who all are to be given the voting rights. All of these nitty-gritties had not been worked out. A fresh constitution that was acceptable to all was yet to be adopted. And so, in this intervening period, an interim government was to be appointed. This interim government was called as the Court of Directory. Because one of the perils of monarchy that the French people had dealt with was that if given too much power to one individual, the individual was likely to become autocratic. And so the Court of Directory was a collegium. It was a collegium of 5 individuals who were appointed, and they were to make their decisions by a majority. Okay, and so this was done so as to ensure that no one individual becomes too powerful. Okay. However, the problem with the directory was that the directory had huge challenges in front of it. It had to tackle the problem of unemployment. France had yet not seen an industrial revolution. There was unemployment, there was food shortages. France had yet not seen industrial revolution. The position of the finances had yet not improved significantly. So a number of those crises which had existed during the breakout of the French Revolution were still there. And they were yet to be addressed in any significant manner. Though the people had supported the French Revolution, and the people here, we basically mean in Paris and other areas, especially in the urban areas, the people had supported the French Revolution, but almost even 6 years after 1789, you see there is no major positive movement to address the concerns which had led to the outbreak of the French Revolution in the very first place. And so, at this point of time, there is a certain amount of disenchantment along with the revolution itself, and that probably the revolution did not bring to the people what it had promised. But yet, you see, at this point of time, the Court of Directory is put into place, and this Court of Directory was to make the decisions. However, you see the absence of any clear consensus within the Court of Directory on the major issues and the policies that should be adopted to tackle them. So the Court of Directory was a period of indecisive rule. Okay, and again, this indecisiveness dragged on for the next few years. Ultimately, you see that the Court of Directory itself became, extremely unpopular in France. By 1799, almost 10 years had passed since the French Revolution had began, but no positive change had happened in France. France had seen almost a civil war-like situation. France had seen a reign of terror. France had seen the overthrow of the monarchy, but there was no consensus on the ruling structure within France, and almost for 10 years, the French economy witnessed no major positive economic changes. It had, on top of apart from economic turmoil, now also underwent a period of political instability. So you see that by 1799, the French Revolution itself was getting discredited amongst the masses. Okay. And what happens is that as soon as the French Revolution starts getting discredited, there is a popular uprising now in Paris against the Directory and the rule of the Directory, which is found to be indecisive and doing nothing or little to address the key substantive issues of the people. And at this point of time, you see that there is another uprising against the Court of Directory. Napoleon comes back to France. Where is he coming back from? I'll talk to you. But he comes back to France at this point of time. And Napoleon is an extremely popular leader. Okay, why? Because he, during the first coalition, played a very important role defending the French Revolution. And he's seen as an able military general who was able to rise within the French army because of his own ability and merit, and was considered as a strong, decisive ruler was considered as a strong, decisive player who was the key, force key individual defending the French Empire against the outside invasion. So he was relatively the more popular one in 1779, and when the popular uprising happened in Paris, he soon came back and he joined the popular uprising, and he was elected. And he was elected by the people not through a formal election or anything, but he soon assumed the leadership of this popular revolt, which overthrew the Directory and placed Napoleon as the next ruler in France. Now, I've skipped a lot of details. There are other reasons also which made Napoleon popular. For example, in 1795, as soon as the Court of Directory was appointed, there was an attempt to assassinate some of the members of some of these 5 members. Napoleon managed to foil the assassination attempt on the Court of Directory. This increased the popularity of Napoleon even further in 1795. Okay, so Napoleon was seen as one of those figures who was, the strong element of hope in the French society. Then in 1795, Napoleon was sent to Egypt, okay, to defend French colony in Egypt against the British invasions. And he was able to manage the invasion from the British on the French territories in Egypt. Okay, so again, you see Napoleon showed his military might partly even there. Okay, he played an important role in saving the Directory from a potential coup and assassination. He played an important role in the first European coalition, the War of First Coalition, defending France against Prussia and Austria. All of these reasons were because of which Napoleon was popular. And he was the one who was seen as an alternative to the indecisiveness of the Directory. Something that people were fed up with almost a decade after the French Revolution. That is where you see the rise of Napoleon. Okay. Now, that's there. Now, we'll talk about other factors also. Let's write down this much first. The Court of Directory was formed in 1795 as a collegiate form of government, was formed in 1795 as a collegiate form of government, and however, from 1795 to 1799, the Directory failed to take any decisive actions to address the underlying weaknesses of the French economy, such as inflation, food shortages, unemployment, etc. By 1799, you see a popular uprising began in Paris. Against the Directory. Napoleon immediately returned from Egypt and joined the uprising. He was soon proclaimed as the leader overthrew the Directory and was declared as the first Council of France, Pradhan Sevak. He did not say that I was the ruler. He proclaimed himself as the voice of the revolution. A commoner, not a noble, not a part of the first or the second estate, but one who was a product of the French Revolution, who could rise only because of the French Revolution and who aimed to uphold the ideas of the French Revolution. That is liberty, equality, and fraternity. Okay. So he was the one who was to mark a break from the past, to protect the French Revolution from its external threats, and also to take path and also to take France upon a rapid path of modernization, of industrialization, of modernization of its economy, of bringing about a modernization of the army also, and also what Napoleon said from this point of time onwards, that we will ensure that the ideas of French Revolution that we are upholding in France, and that is power to the people, that the monarchy has no divine right to rule. Rather, the people have the right to elect a leader of their own. So we will uphold these ideas of French Revolution, and we will spread these ideas of French Revolution to other areas in Europe also. Okay. So that's what he is saying. And 1799 to 1802, as soon as Napoleon actually proclaims, as soon as Napoleon was proclaimed as the leader, of France, you see that 1799 to 1802 is the War of Second Coalition. As soon as Napoleon declared himself as the leader of France, you see Britain, Prussia, Austria again attack France. Why? Because Napoleon was the one who started saying things that obviously no other monarchy would like. That we will uphold these ideas here. I am not a monarch. I am a voice of the people. Monarchy must not exist. We will uphold the rights of every people in every region to form a government of their own. So these are ideas that monarchies don't like. And so obviously the monarchies attacked France. And as much as monarchies attacked France, as much as Napoleon gained. In the sense that the monarchies failed to overthrow Napoleon in France, and Napoleon, being a strong and able military commander, was able to ensure that the French were not defeated in this war. Now, what is important to understand is that French are not defeated in this war. Why is it that Britain is there, Prussia is there, Austria is there, Russia also is there in this war? Everybody is against France, but France is not defeated. Why? Now, it's not just that Napoleon is a very strong commander and he could single-handedly turn the tide of the war. Yes, he was an important military commander and was an able military commander. But apart from this, also is the fact that all these neighbors, whether it is France, whether it is Prussia, Austria, Russia, they never, Britain, Russia, Austria, Prussia, they never coordinated their strategy. Rather, all of them launched their individual wars time and again against Napoleon, never in a coordinated manner. And this also allowed Napoleon to deal with them a bit more easily. Okay. So that's there. So that's the only explanation that I can offer you in the limited time that we have as to why, there are the two reasons. One is that Napoleon himself was a very able military commander. And obviously, you have to understand that apart from Britain, even a weak France was stronger than many others in Europe. Okay. So, even despite their weaknesses, the French military was a strong military. And the other monarchies which were attacking France never coordinated their attempts, and Napoleon also was a strong military commander. These were the reasons why France did not get defeated in the second war of coalition, or the second European coalition as it is called, from 1799 till 1802. And ultimately, because France did not get defeated in 1802, Britain formally recognized France and the rule of Napoleon over France with the Treaty of Amiens. Okay, so we'll write down the spelling and all. With the Treaty of Amiens, Napoleon's rule was recognized by Britain over France. And now, after this, Napoleon declares himself not just the first Council of France, but the first Council of France for life. Till he is alive, he will protect the revolution. So you see that there are a number of popular plays which have been made on this. Okay? For example, NSD takes out this play almost once every year on the French Revolution. 8 years ago when I saw the play, I did not understand the play. Okay? And that was, if you go to the NSD, you'll realize that people there are very, very, very well read. Okay? And reading there is essential, and writing itself comes only with reading, and writing a good play will rely upon a good reading. Right? So, basically, one of the central themes of many of these plays has often been that how Napoleon, though himself was a product of the French Revolution, though argued that he would protect the French Revolution and declared himself as the leader of the French Revolution, ultimately, in many ways, did not uphold all the ideas of the French Revolution and rather betrayed some of these ideas of French Revolution. Okay, so that is why it is often argued, it is often said that Napoleon, though he was a product of the French Revolution, he himself undermined many of the ideals of the French Revolution. And you see that in 1802, though he again manages to defend revolutionary France from the monarchical attacks, he declares himself as the first consul of France and for life. And you see that he again proclaims that he is the one who's going to play an important role in spreading the ideas of French Revolution, spreading the ideas of nationalism to regions even beyond France. So this does not stop here. By 1803, he is first consul of France for life. And now in 1805, he finally begins on his project. That is to take the French Revolution, idea of the French Revolution to other areas in Europe. 1805 to 1807 is the third European coalition. Now, French neighbors are not attacking France. Now, France is attacking its neighbors. Okay? And now, it is Napoleon who attacks Prussia, Austria, Britain, everyone. Left, right, center. Napoleon has decided he will take French Revolution everywhere. Okay? So, he attacked Spain also. Okay? So, I'll draw a map, then it will become clear. He attacks Spain. He attacks Austria, he attacks Prussia, okay, and he threatens to attack Russia also. And at the same point of time, he attacks Britain also. So left, right, center, everywhere he is attacking from 1805 to 1807. So that's something that happens. So let's first write down this, then we talk about the third European coalition. So the War of Second Coalition ended. The War of Second Coalition, saw Britain, Prussia, Austria, and Russia attacking France. So Britain, Prussia, Austria, and Russia attacking France to overthrow Napoleon's rule. To overthrow Napoleon's rule. Okay. Now, however, Napoleon managed to defend his rule against these attacks. In 1802, with the Treaty of Amiens. Okay, even if you can remember these names, that's more than enough. Escape. In the PPT I've given a few more names also. But even if you can remember these names, that's more than enough. Okay. Even अगर ये भी नहीं याद हो तो कोई बात नहीं. Okay. So, but never miss out on an answer just because of this. Okay. Treaty of Amiens was in 1802 with the Treaty of Amiens. The British signed a treaty, in 1802 with the Treaty of Amiens, the British formally recognized Napoleon's rule over France. The hope was that finally this will settle the wars. Okay, that now that Britain is recognizing Napoleon's rule over France, the French are not going to take matters any further. But Napoleon had different plans. By now, Napoleon had convinced himself as well as convinced the French people that he is the one which is one step. He is the one who is the single player who could prevent France from descending into chaos. Okay? And he was the one who was a leader not just of the French people, but a leader of people in general throughout Europe. And he would export the idea of the French Revolution to even other areas, and that is why you see in 1805 to 1807, जैसे मोदी जी कहें कि हम enough India, so obviously I am going to decide India's fate. Now Modi ji does not talk about 2019 elections anymore. He talks 2022 only. Okay? Presuming that there is no election to come in 2019. Okay? Every scheme in 2022 only. Then, so his vision obviously is because he can envision so much because he's meant to win the next elections. Right? Whether he does or he does not, time will tell. But whether, even if he does, then the next vision can be what? That just like I will take in India to prosperity, I will take South Asia to prosperity. Right? So that is what Napoleon is envisioning. That not now that I've saved France, I will save Europe. Okay. Now 1805 to 1807 is the time when you see the third coalition, where Napoleon aimed to spread the ideas of French Revolution, that is the ideas of French Revolution, that is the objection to divine right of monarchy to rule, power in the hands of people. Napoleon also did a plebiscite. Once Napoleon won, okay, I've not told you this, but Napoleon is smart, okay. So once he won the war against Britain, he said, before he declared himself as the first consul for life, he did a plebiscite in France. He just defeated Britain in 1802. He immediately ordered a plebiscite in France and said, I am giving the voice to the people to decide whether or not they want me as the leader of the French Revolution. If you win a war, that's the best time to have an election. Putin showed you that with Crimea, with an annexation of Crimea. Putin annexed Crimea and immediately he announced elections because he knew he would win, right? So even if you can get 5 kilometers from China, okay, you're winning the next election, okay? It doesn't matter, nobody lives on that 5 kilometers, nobody ever is going to live on that 5 kilometers, but if you can, you're winning a war, right? And so why war fighting is often very popular if you can win it, right? So when Napoleon aimed to spread the idea of the French Revolution, the objection to divine right of monarchy to rule, that is the objection to divine right of monarchy to rule the power in the hands of people, to other areas beyond France, in Europe. He supported the nationalistic impulses in European society against the prevailing monarchies in Austria, Prussia, Russia, etc. Now, what he does is, in 1806, okay, you write down, then I'll explain. In 1806, Napoleon appointed his brother Joseph Bonaparte. Napoleon Bonaparte, Joseph Bonaparte. He appointed his brother Joseph Bonaparte as the ruler of Naples. Naples is later, which would becomes a part of Italy. Okay, I'll draw a map. It will become clear then. Pardon? No, Naples and Sicily are southern Italy. Piedmont and Sardinia and Lombardia and Venetia are northern Italy. We'll draw a map, then we'll see, because otherwise ये सब कुछ नहीं समझ में आने वाला है, right? So you just write that first, and then we'll write. So basically, that is something that he does in 1806. In 1807, in 1805, there is also another battle, and this is the Battle of Trafalgar. The Battle of Trafalgar. Okay. Now, you can draw firstly, this is just for your understanding, okay? No answers, nothing where you have to draw this, just so that you can understand what exactly is happening. Now, what Napoleon is doing is that he is the one in France, right? Now, the major neighbors that he has to deal with are Prussia, are Austria, Britain, Spain, and then basically you see that is here you see is Sicily and Naples. Okay. Later you will see there are two things here. One is Lombardy and Venetia. Then there is something here that's Piedmont, Sardinia. आपने कभी इटली का मैप देखा है? Right? If you look, हमारे को भी था, मैंने भी नहीं देखा था. We just think that it's a very, Italy is a relatively very small piece of land, okay, and it's composed of a Piedmont, Sardinia. Today, Italy is composed of Piedmont, Sardinia, Lombardia, Venetia, Sicily, Naples, Rome, okay, and a few other territories as well. Okay, so this whole, what I've drawn in blue here, that is, or this, okay, this one, this whole, this is what is Italy today. But that is not how it existed then. Then there was no Italy at all. Okay, sorry. This whole thing is Italy today. That's not how it was before. Okay, before 1870s there was nothing like Italy, but there were Italian speaking areas. Okay, there were Italian speaking areas, but there was no Italy as a country. Okay, now Italy was not something that was a common unified political existence. However, what was there was that when, now this is just for your understanding, okay, when before Napoleon, till the Bourbon dynasty was there in France, you see Spain, Naples and Sicily. Spain, Naples and Sicily, they were ruled by Piedmont, Piedmont, Sardinia. I will come to these names again when we'll talk about Italian unification. Okay, so Piedmont and Sardinia, they were an independent state of their own. Okay, Piedmont and Sardinia, they were an independent state of their own. Lombardia and Venetia were under the control of Austria. Naples and Sicily were under the control of France. The Holy Roman Empire was the one in charge of Rome. कोई ज़रूरत नहीं है याद करने की, कोई नहीं पूछेगा. This is just to explain it to you that there was no central Italy. Most of the Italian speaking areas were in control of different powers of Europe. Okay, that's what you must know. Now, why I'm telling you all of this is for you to also know that the Bourbon dynasty was in charge of Spain at this point of time, and also Naples and Sicily. Now, when Bourbon dynasty was replaced by Napoleon, Napoleon now came the true test of Napoleon. If Napoleon was very eager about giving people a say, then the Napoleon had declared himself as the first consul of France. But what about Spain? What about Sicily? Naples and Sicily. In Naples and Sicily, basically, he appoints his brother as the leader of the revolution. Yeah, and in Spain also, you see that he does the same. So one of the things that Napoleon started doing was that I am the leader of the revolution. Now my relatives are also leader of the revolution. Okay? So, sunrise. Right? So, nepotism fell gaya. Right? So basically you see that nepotism was something that Napoleon was strongly criticized for at this point of time. Okay? That nepotism is something that is happening and it's visible from 1806 onwards. Now, also, now that Spain was under the control, Napoleon had the same idea that I will take forward the French Revolution everywhere. And if I will take forward the French Revolution everywhere, I will also be the leader of the revolution everywhere. So it's not that he is taking just the French Revolution, he also envisions himself to be the leader of Europe. Okay? And his desires to take the idea of the French Revolution were also geared by his expansionist agenda. Okay? And that is where you firstly see that he starts attacking Austria, Prussia, Russia, and Britain. Russia he does not attack actually, ultimately. Russia's attack happens a bit later. But I'm telling you here itself. Now, and he also attacks Britain. Now, Napoleon's eyes are specifically on Britain at this point of time because he knows the challenge that can come to France can only come from Britain. And so, you see that he focuses mostly on Britain. And this is what happens in the Battle of Trafalgar. The Battle of Trafalgar is between Britain and France, where the French are deciding now to take the matters to Britain and attack the British positions. But there's a problem, and that is the English Channel. The problem is the English Channel because Napoleon was a military commander whose expertise was in warfare on land. He is not the one who was ever in charge of the Navy. And as I told you so many times before, the British Navy was superior to the French Navy. So in the Battle of Trafalgar, this is the first defeat for Napoleon. When Napoleon tries to attack Britain, but even before Napoleon's ships or the French army or the French Navy's ship could attack Britain, the Britain bombed the French Navy left, right, center in the Battle of Trafalgar at Spain. And you see that this was a huge setback for Napoleon's Navy or the French Navy. And what became clear in 1806 that territorial expansion for France into Britain is out of question. So the Battle of Trafalgar was a cruel shock for Napoleon and this first major Napoleon defeat that happened in 1806. But Napoleon is not the one who gives up easily. That is why he is Napoleon. Right? And so Napoleon then takes the matter to the next level and he says that if we can't militarily challenge Britain at this point of time, we will make the British economy so weak that then there would soon be a time that we will impose a defeat on Britain. And for this, Napoleon envisions what is called as the continental system. Okay? Napoleon says that if I can't defeat them militarily as of now, I will impose a huge financial cost on the British and I will weaken their economy so much that it becomes easier for us to eventually defeat the British. And for this, he imposed what was called as the continental system. The continental system was based because of two reasons. And why? Because continental system is a separate question bhi aa sakta hai. Okay? That the continental system was based on two reasons. Napoleon had started taking reins of France from 1799 onwards, and he was focusing on increasing the economy. He was focusing on increasing the economic growth of France. And for this, he was in favor of bringing the industrial revolution. And you see a movement towards industrial revolution in France. But if France was to undergo an industrial revolution, then the French goods would have to compete with the British goods. But the Britain had undergone industrial revolution almost 50 years ago. So Britain was far ahead in the race of industrialization as compared to France. And there was no way the French goods could easily compete with the British goods. And Britain was already dominating the trade in Europe, world, and obviously also in Europe. So Europe was a major market for British goods at this point of time. And if France had to make a dent, it had to do something which could ensure that the French goods would find acceptance in the European market. But the British goods were already cheaper and better. Right? At the same point of time, but there was no, so there was, the British were much ahead. To tackle this problem, to firstly ensure a market for French goods, because without markets, French Industrial Revolution could not prosper. To secure a market for French goods, and at the same point of time to hurt the British economic interest, what Napoleon does is imposes the continental system, which basically said very simple thing. That Napoleon had already subdued the rest of continental Europe. Continental meaning which are connected through land, right? So Britain had already, Napoleon had already subdued the continental Europe, and he made it a very simple rule that no European country would buy goods from Britain. If no European countries would buy goods from Britain, Britain would be denied a market in Europe, and the British economy will suffer heavily. Okay, that was Napoleon's idea. But if nobody is going to buy from Britain, somebody else must be in a position to supply supply goods to the European market, and that was French. So in a way, with continental system, he's hurting the British economic interest and trying to give a boost to the French economy and the French Industrial Revolution by imposing an economic blockade on the selling of British goods in continental Europe. And why other states had to follow what Napoleon was saying? Because if they would not follow, Napoleon was ready to export the French Revolution everywhere, right? So Napoleon had these simple terms. Now the only problem in Napoleon's plan was that though it looked very good in paper, the problem was in the implementation. That though it was a lofty plan, the French industries were not in a position to meet the huge demands of Europe. Okay, so the French production could not meet the demand in Europe, and so the supply was left behind the demand, and that is why you see that inflation and prices started increasing across Europe. And as soon as inflation and prices start increasing, any leader's popularity starts to decline. And so Napoleon's wisdom of Napoleon's rule, that if he was the voice of the people, then why would he impose such an economic hardship on the people? So there was a rise in dissatisfaction against Napoleon's rule and Napoleon's ideas from 1707 onwards with the imposition of the continental system. And thus, you see the first major revolt that happens against Napoleon is by Russia. And Russia's king at this point of time, Tsar Alexander II, he refuses to be a part of this continental system any further because prices were increasing, and the increased prices could lead to an overthrow of the monarchy, and the people could revolt. So he broke out of the continental system, and because he broke out of the continental system, Napoleon attacked Russia. Okay. Napoleon attacked Russia, saying that we'll tell you what are the costs of not obeying the revolution. And so Napoleon attacked Russia, and Napoleon in his life had not lost a war till now. And so Napoleon was fairly confident that we'll win, and we'll come back. Okay. But this is not how it happened. Because when the war began, and this is what, Napoleon's attack on Russia is what leads eventually to the Fourth European Coalition, the final European series of wars, where you see that Napoleon firstly attacked in 1712. By 1712, Napoleon attacked Russia. And Napoleon's attack of Russia was not... 1812. Napoleon attacked Russia, and Napoleon's attack of Russia was not a very well planned out attack. Okay, Napoleon, why and why was it not a very well planned planned attack? Because Napoleon was fairly confident that there was no chance any Russian power would be able to defend the attack of the French Empire at this point of time. And he attacked Russia, and he attacked Russia almost 2 months before the winters, the Russian winters. The idea of Napoleon was that we will, within a month, pack up, win the war, and come back. Okay? But this is not how it turned out, because for Napoleon to mobilize the troops itself from France all the way to Russia was a huge logistical challenge. And his troop deployment in Russia itself took a lot amount of time. And by the time the fighting began, the Russian winters had begun, and also he did not estimate that it would be such a tough fight. The result was that Napoleon went with 4 lakh troops to Russia, but returned back only with 80,000. It was a huge setback to Napoleon. His over-aggressiveness, his overconfidence, and poor planning in the Russian war saw that the Napoleon's forces could not survive the Russian winter, and being lost in large numbers. Napoleon had this huge ability. He was a charismatic individual. So it is not that he's only taking French army. He would take everybody's army. For example, in Poland then was not a country. And Polish people were partly under the control of Prussia and partly under the control of Russia. So the Polish-speaking people were not having a nation of their own. Okay, so Napoleon went through Poland and told to the Polish people, you should join us because we will unite all Polish-speaking together in a common country. Okay, so he recruited a large number of soldiers even from Polish areas who were fighting for Napoleon. So Napoleon was a charismatic individual, did raise a large and a big army, did go to Russia, but did not foresee the challenge and did not plan the execution really well, which resulted in a huge military setback. The Navy had already suffered a setback a couple of years ago in the Battle of Trafalgar. The army suffered a setback in the battle in Russia. Okay, and that's the Battle of Leipzig. Okay, and basically after which you see that the decline of Napoleon becomes imminent. And now you see that Britain, Prussia, Austria, Russia all joined hands against Napoleon. His army was already devastated in the Russian winter in 1712. And 1713, you see Napoleon is defeated and Napoleon is forced to retire from politics. He's not killed or anything. He's forced to retire from politics and he's told that you go and live on the coast of Spain along with your family and live a happy life. Don't interfere in the matters. And the monarchy was reinstated in France, and the Bourbon dynasty was reinstated in France, Spain, and the Kingdom of Naples and 2 Sicilies. Okay, this was done, but Napoleon being Napoleon, he would not listen. And so, by 1914, he reappears in France, escaping from the coast in Italy, from Elba, and he reappears in France, and again, he appeals to the French army to join him to uphold the French Revolution. Okay, and again a section of the army does join him, but again he is defeated in the Battle of Waterloo. And finally, now again he is not killed. He is sent to St. Helena, okay, which is a far-off island in the South Atlantic Ocean, and there he remains there till his death in 1721. He could not escape from St. Helena. Okay. And so you see that finally Napoleon's coming to an end. And after Napoleon is finally sent off after the Battle of Waterloo, you see the Congress of Vienna. Okay. So that's the story of Napoleon, who was an important leader. But till Napoleon was there was a considerable period of political instability in Europe in general. And Napoleon threatened the political existence of a number of monarchies in Europe. He had already the monarchy was overthrown in France, but he was also threatening a number of monarchies in Europe. Okay. So let's first quickly write down about this much, and then we'll take it forward. Any doubts still here? Yeah.
Concordat of 1801.
Pardon? The Concordat of 1801. The Concordat, देखिए, I've not discussed this in the class or given in the PPT. ये सारी details, for example, the Concordat of 1801 was basically an attempt to establish again, it was an attempt firstly to bring peace between France and its neighbors also, and the Concordat was also partly aimed at establishing, we'll talk about Napoleon's policies, I've not talked about that, okay. We'll see that with the church also, the aim was to establish peace, okay. And with the Concordat, basically, the French Revolution had argued for a limited or no role of the church. And Napoleon is actually introducing back the church after 1801 with the Concordat. We'll talk about that. Yeah, we'll talk about Napoleon's policies. To what extent did he uphold the French Revolution or not? So we'll talk about that. But let's first do the timeline.
In the First and Second War, Napoleon was all those forces were fighting. There was no coordination. And in fact, Napoleon was fighting against them. So what this coalition was all about? Coalition of European coalition.
The coalition. What is asking is a valid question. Ki, sir, why do they have a coalition if they're not coordinating? And also, what was this coalition for? Right? The coalition was only for one particular purpose. That was to ensure that monarchies rule Europe and that the rule of monarchies is not threatened. So what basically the result of the coalitions was that though the coordination was there between them, the coordination was not a very good coordination. They never pooled in their forces, they never coordinated their attacks. The coalition also was broadly that this is the period when all the monarchies are not into any bitter infighting between each other. Rather, they are directed against Napoleon. That is all the coalition is all about. Okay? Coalition is directed against Napoleon. That's it. So with the Battle of Trafalgar. The next year, the prelims examination is in which month? 3rd June. Right, the cycle is shifted back. So, and the mains is in? October. October onwards, huh? Okay. 1st, 2nd October, whatever. Okay. So that means the only good thing is that you will get probably a Diwali off, right? That you have, and also you can have a good New Year, right? So that's there. Now the Battle of Trafalgar was the Battle of Trafalgar was a major setback for French Navy. The Battle of Trafalgar was a major setback for the French Navy, which was routed at the hands of the British Navy. This was a huge setback for Napoleon's aim to militarily subdue Britain. Then, to militarily subdue Britain. In 1807, I'll also dictate a few questions after this to you, that can come from here. In 1807, Napoleon introduced the continental system with the continental system which involved an economic blockade on Britain, the CS or continental system. The continental system basically disallowed the selling of British goods in continental Europe. For example, Russia, Prussia, Austria, etc. Napoleon introduced continental system to achieve two purposes. A, the first purpose was to deny the European market to British goods and impose a huge financial cost on the British economy. Napoleon was partly successful in this aim as as Britain's exports fell by 2/3 during this period. The second aim was to provide an assured market for French goods and to prevent any serious competition from British goods to the nascent French industries. However, to the nascent French industries or the just, the French industries who were just coming of age or, just budding at this point of time. However, the French industries could not cope. However, the French industries could not cope with the huge demand in Europe, leading to shortages, inflation, which soon made the continental system unpopular. soon made the continental system unpopular in Europe. When Russia decided to withdraw, from the continental system, Napoleon threatened to attack. Napoleon threatened to attack Russia, and this eventually resulted in the outbreak of the Fourth European Coalition. Which saw Napoleon's forces suffering a huge setback. Sorry. My parents always told me that I'm very careless. So, it's a living proof of that. So, which saw Napoleon's forces suffering a huge setback at the hands of Russia. Ultimately resulting in French defeat. You see, 1814, you see, Napoleon made a last-ditch attempt at the Battle of Waterloo. However, he failed to overthrow the Bourbon dynasty, which had been reinstated in 1813 France. Napoleon was exiled to Saint Helena, where he died in 1820. So basically, you see these four European coalitions. Now, the first question, and you can write down the questions first. Written? So, the continental system was meant to weaken the British Empire, continental system was meant to weaken the British Empire, but ended up hurting Napoleon's interests eventually. Discuss. They can, twist this in many number of ways and ask you that, even when they asked you about the factors responsible for the decline of Napoleon, there also you mentioned the continental system. They can ask you a question also that the Napoleon's introduction of continental system was aimed at the British, but it ended up weakening the French Empire itself, or Napoleon himself. Discuss. So that's also another question that they can ask. Okay. Also, another question that we are going to talk about is, to what extent the French Revolution was an ideal revolution. Or to what extent the French Revolution was an ideal revolution, or they can also again twist this and ask, to what extent, or critically analyze the strengths and weaknesses of the French Revolution, or to what extent the ideas of the French Revolution were revolutionary. Okay. So that the same thing that we discussed about the American Revolution also, right? We talked about that how American Revolution did not abolish slavery, right? How the American Revolution did not grant radical land reforms, how the American Revolution did not do what? Grant voting rights to women, right? And so there were certain shortcomings of the ideas of the American Revolution. Even though it established equality before the law, even though the American Revolution also talked about the freedom of religion, or the freedom to practice one's own religion according to their own choice, it did have a number of significant shortcomings as well. So both the positives and the negatives you have to keep in mind. We didn't write about the American Revolution, how revolutionary it was, but it is given in the PPT. तो जाके पढ़िए, okay? जाके उसको भी पढ़ना है. सिर्फ ये नहीं, जाके वो भी पढ़ना है. That's what, okay? So again, now similarly, a similar thing can be asked about the French Revolution also, or it can also be twisted another way and asked that the French Revolution was essentially a middle class phenomenon. Discuss. I have not explained this, but I'll explain this. Okay. So they can ask you a question like this also, that the French Revolution was essentially a middle class phenomena. Discuss. Another question is, Napoleon was himself a product of the French Revolution, but his policies undermined the ideas of French Revolution. Analyze the statement. Another question is, discuss the significance of Congress of Vienna. What were the objectives, and to what extent were they achieved, and to what extent were they achieved? That's another question. Now, let's go one by one. the first thing that we're doing is, these are small topics, especially, okay, the first question I've already discussed with you, continental system. Now what we're doing is an analysis of the French, ideas of the French Revolution, not implementation. Implementation का जो problem है वो अलग. The implementation question is about Napoleon, that how much did Napoleon uphold the ideas of the French Revolution. But even in the ideas of French Revolution itself, or to what extent the ideas of French Revolution were revolutionary, that also is a matter of debate. Okay, that life, liberty, liberty, equality, and fraternity that the French Revolution was talking about, how revolutionary were these ideas? Now, one of the things that we say about the French Revolution is that the French Revolution actually, what did the French Revolution do? The French Revolution brought about what? An abolition of the guild system. The French Revolution brought about an abolishment of feudalism also. Okay? The French Revolution brought about abolishment of guild system, abolishment of feudalism, opened the higher services, higher positions to the third estates. Okay? But the French Revolution also began actually with the protest of women regarding food shortages in Paris. This was later joined by the National Assembly and even by the sections of the army, and it became the Paris mob, as it was called. And that is what sees the growth of the French Revolution in 1789. So women also were some of the participants of this. And you see that the French Revolution, which happened at this point of time, had began with the idea also that women would be granted the right to vote. But there is no actual granting of right to vote to women. In fact, Napoleon never granted the right to vote to women. And the right to vote was restricted only to the men. Okay. So women were not granted the right to vote at this point of time. And that's something that we saw in the American Revolution also. Again. Okay. तो एक तरीके का ऐसा भी question पूछ सकते हैं that in your mains examination, just like this was a question this year, right? That 18th century was a period of fragmented polity, right? Similar question they can also ask is, world history has often demonstrated that the ideas of the revolution have often not been held by revolution themselves. Discuss. Okay. So you can write in brief about American Revolution and how some of the ideas of the American Revolution were not revolutionary or were not upheld later. Similarly, the same about the French Revolution. Okay. And that's there. So, again, that question can be, said. And for example, that such a kind of a question can also be framed. So when you look at the French Revolution, you firstly see women are not being granted the right to vote. Though, yes, what are the positives are feudalism is being abolished, right? The guild system is being abolished. The higher services were thrown open to people from the third estate. Equality before the law is sought to be restored. The role of the church has been vastly diminished. So there are positive things also. But there are other problems with the French Revolution also. For example, apart from the women issue, there is also the issue that you see that the higher services are being thrown open to the third estate. But I told you the third estate was a vastly heterogeneous group, which included the educated middle class, but it also included peasants, etc. The educated middle class was the one who was to gain the most by the opening of the higher jobs. But when it came to, and though feudalism was abolished, radical land reforms were never introduced, which equitably distributed lands amongst the peasants. So the absence of radical land reforms meant that the benefits of the French Revolution were largely cornered off by the middle class. Also, the breakout of the French Revolution is actually happening in the city of Paris and is also being essentially supported predominantly by the middle class in large numbers. That is why we also say that the French Revolution was actually being initiated is by the support and the participation of the middle class, primarily in urban areas in France, especially in and around the city of Paris. And they were also the key gainers of the French Revolution with the access granted to them to the higher jobs. But when it came to the condition of peasantry, there was no drastic improvement after the French Revolution. Neither the agricultural productivity increased significantly, nor there were any radical land reforms that were introduced. Moreover, women who played a key role in the initial phases of the French Revolution were not granted any voting rights by either Napoleon or the French Revolution in general. So you see that that's also a problem. That this we are writing. Okay. So, but in short, an evaluation of the French Revolution. Yeah. Feudalism is land reform. Feudalism at least is one positive thing. Nobody is denying that. But a radical land reform would have been the grant of land to the peasant. That is not, feudalism, as I told you, is what? That a peasant is tied to a piece of land. No longer peasants were tied to a piece of land. Peasants were free to work for whoever offered them a good wage, but the land still belonged to the landholders. Okay. So that is why even though feudalism was abolished, no radical redistribution of land was done. And so, even though it was revolutionary, the French Revolution was revolutionary, it was not revolutionary enough. That it did bring about political equality, but only for the men. It did bring about abolition of feudalism and thus decrease the economic exploitation of peasants, but it did not bring about economic equality because radical land reforms were missing. It did bring about social equality. Why? Because the privileges of the first and second estates were abolished, but still, even in terms of social equality, you see that women are not accorded a equal status to men. Okay, so those are the positives as well as the negatives. So, yeah.
What kind of monarchy was it?
So we'll talk about, and that's a valid question, that after 1815, when the monarchy is reinstated, is it an absolute monarchy or is it a constitutional monarchy? Okay. So we'll see that the understanding was to reinstate an absolute monarchy. Okay. And in fact, Napoleon himself had become an absolute monarch already. Okay. So there's no question of constitutional monarchy. Okay. So there's no constitutional monarchy, anything which is being put in place here. Okay. And we'll talk a bit more when we talk about the Congress of Vienna. Okay. So any other doubts on this evaluation of French Revolution? Yeah.
The French Revolution evolved because it was established as to
जो काम था वो नहीं हुआ. Re-establish हो गई monarchy. अभी story खत्म नहीं हुई है. So, for example, what he's asking is a valid question. That can we say that the French Revolution failed in general completely? Neither the ideas are being upheld, and though whatever positive things happened, Napoleon is being overthrown and the monarchy is being reinstated. So we'll talk about a bit more because the story does not end there. One of the things that we'll see is that even though Napoleon had himself betrayed many of the ideas of the French Revolution, he himself had become a monarch, and ultimately even he is being thrown and the Bourbon dynasty is being reinstated. The revolution does not stop in 1850. In fact, there were other revolutions also in 1830, in 1848, and then in 1871. Ultimately, in 1871, you see monarchies are overthrown and republic established in France. Why? Because the ideas that had been unleashed by Napoleon were not that would have been completely undone. So we'll talk a bit more about it. Okay, so that's something that we'll talk about. So let's write down about the evaluation of fundamental rights. I used to write that French Revolution, fundamental right, the same. So the evaluation of the French Revolution. When we talk about the evaluation of the French Revolution, it is often argued that the ideas of the French Revolution were not it is often argued that the ideas of the French Revolution were, though not were, though a clear break from the past. However, they did suffer from many shortcomings. So, just write this like the way I'm writing. In the political sphere, you see that in the political sphere, you see that the monarchy was overthrown. The privileges, the privileges of the first and second estates were abolished. Okay. However, the period from 1789 to 1799 saw considerable political turmoil. The rule of Directory was indecisive. The rule of Directory was indecisive, and there was no smooth transition to a constitutional monarchy or a republican. Because initially, you remember, I told you that the attempt was to make Louis XVI a constitutional monarch, but that did not work, right? So there was no smooth transition to a constitutional monarchy or a republican form of government. In the economic sphere, we say that the positive is that the feudalism was abolished. Feudalism was abolished. Right? And the guild system was abolished. However, radical land reforms in the form of redistribution of land to the tiller was not granted. The problems of unemployment, high inflation, etc. persisted in post 1789 period, persisted in the post 1789 period, and persisted in the 1789 period. Okay, that's there. And the third is the social. So one is the political sphere, the other is the economic sphere, and the third is the social sphere, where you see that the role of the church and its powers were vastly curtailed. Okay. Also, you see that men were granted the right to vote. And local elections, even though Napoleon was there, some local elections used to be held, in the local municipal councils, etc. in France at this point of time. Also, what you see is the higher positions in administration were thrown open to first and second, were thrown open to the third estates. However, women were still not granted the right to vote. Also, the government jobs were largely captured by the educated middle class leaving behind the concerns of peasantry largely unaddressed. Now, the concerns of the peasantry largely unaddressed. Okay. Now, basically, leaving behind the concerns of the peasantry largely unaddressed. Now, everybody's written this much? Written? So, okay, the other question that I just gave you also was that the French Revolution was essentially a middle class phenomenon, right? So I'm not dictating this, but you just keep this in mind that the key leaders within the French Revolution. Firstly, the first point that you should, there are 3 or 4 points only, there are not many points. Okay, the first point that you must keep in mind that the reach of the French Revolution or the breakout of the French Revolution was essentially in the French urban centers, predominantly in and around Paris. Okay, so urban centers में कौन रहेगा? The professional middle class, right? Not the peasantry, right? So the breakout itself happened largely in the urban centers where the urban middle class was located in significant numbers. That's the first point. The second point is that apart from, I hate Delhi at this time of the year. Okay, so now the second point is essentially that apart from the urban middle class, that was the key center, the urban centers which were the key centers of the revolt at this point of time, or the revolution. The second point is that this jobs were cornered, or the benefits of the French Revolution in terms of opening of jobs to the third estates were cornered largely by the educated middle classes. Third point is that the concern of the peasantry, who formed the bulk of the rural countryside, were left largely unaddressed. For example, the need of a radical redistribution of land. Okay, that's something there. And also, some of the major key leaders of the French Revolt also came from the urban middle class. So that is, so it is often argued that is because of these reasons, it is also often argued that that the French Revolution was essentially led by the middle class and benefited the middle class in France. Okay, and at the same point of time, but you can also, no need to conclude only on such a pessimistic note only. At the same point of time, you can also point out that some of the general ideas of the French Revolution, however, some of the general ideas of the French Revolution were to benefit the masses, including the peasant masses, such as abolition of feudalism, such as the grant of voting rights, right, at least to the men. Also, you see that basically, also what you see is that the abolition of the unequal taxation system, right? So even that is a respite. So was there no respite to the peasants? No, there was respite to the peasants, or there was some relief that the peasants also got. But largely, the benefits of the French Revolution were accumulated by the middle class. That's there. By the urban located middle classes who were heading the revolt also, and who largely cornered the benefits of the revolution also. Okay, that's the point. I'm not writing this again. Okay, yahi points hai, inhi ko guma guma ke you can analyze this and make many different questions. Now the next point also to keep in mind, the next thing that we're going to talk about is Napoleon was a product of the French Revolution, but his policies undermined the ideas of the French Revolution. All the policies of Napoleon that we have not talked about till now. Okay. देखिए last topic है ये, which is important. The French Revolution is the first and the last topic which is going to be so painful. The next all topics are small, okay? Small as well as interesting. क्योंकि नेपोलियन की लड़ाइयाँ तो इंटरेस्टिंग थी, लेकिन उसके बाद का ये सब is not that interesting. So the next things that we are going to talk after this, Italian, French, Italian, German unification, they are relatively shorter topics. Okay? They're just one, two questions that you can make from there, hardly. And if at all has to come from a question has to come from them, it's going to be a direct question. There's not too much of twisting that you see here. So the policies of Napoleon. Firstly, Napoleon is the one, you see, again, whenever you have to look at policies, again, we can look at political, economic, social, right? So when you look at the policies of Napoleon, in terms of, let's start with the political ideas and policies of Napoleon, okay? Firstly, Napoleon himself, we've already talked about, that Napoleon talked about that he was a leader of the people's revolution, or the revolution of the people. Napoleon supported the ideas of nationalism. And one of the things that Napoleon also supported was the idea of linguistically similar areas being united to form nations. According to Napoleon, a nation was supposed to be one where all linguistically similar people should come under one common political rule of a leader who is a voice of these people. So for example, there were Polish speaking areas, I told you, in Russia as well as in Prussia. Napoleon told to the Polish people that you revolt against the Prussian king and you revolt against the Russian king, and I will make you a separate Poland. Okay. Similarly, he told to the Italian speaking population in Lombardia and Venetia in Naples and Sicily, in Piedmont and Sardinia, you should unite together to form one nation of Italian-speaking people. Similarly, there were German-speaking people in Prussia, there were German-speaking people in Austria, there were also other smaller German-speaking areas. In fact, there were 300 big and small German-speaking areas which were small kingdoms at this point of time. The two biggest German-speaking areas were in Prussia and Austria. Okay, so he said that all German people should unite together to form a nation of their own. So Napoleon was a contradictory figure in many ways. It's not a very simple figure to understand. He is supporting the idea that people must be allowed to form a nation of their own. He's saying that linguistic homogeneity must be a basis to form a nation, and people must form a nation of their own and overthrow the monarchy. So Napoleon was a strong proponent of these ideas, and he promised to, and he stated that he would uphold these ideas after the overthrow of the monarchy. That was his political ideas. In favor of nationalism, in favor of overthrow of monarchy, in favor of linguistically uniting or uniting linguistically similar areas into a common nation. Also, that was Napoleon's policy. That was Napoleon's political ideas. But also, if these were Napoleon's political ideas, there were other things also that Napoleon, is associated with. That Napoleon was not a one who was too much in favor of freedom of speech and expression. Okay. So to Napoleon, discipline and a strong state were more important. And so in Napoleon's France, in Napoleonic France, basically there was no right of freedom of association. And not more than 20 people could not assemble, even without arms. Even non-violently, more than 20 people could not assemble without a prior permission of the government. So Napoleon was no such big fan of freedom of speech and expression or association or anything. Okay. So even though he supported nationalism, he did not support this freedom of speech and expression, too much of that. Similarly, in terms of social ideas, Napoleon, the ideas of the French Revolution was what? That a little or no role for the church. But Napoleon brought back the role of the church by establishing what was called as the Concordat with the church, or a peaceful and friendly relations with the church. The Concordat was basically to do one thing, that it said that the church would be allowed a limited role, and the church would be re-allowed a role in public life in France. And in fact, Napoleon said that Napoleon's or the state's money would be used to pay the salaries of the priests. Okay? But what was the role going to be the role of the priest? To Napoleon, the Catholic religion could promote discipline and loyalty. And so the state was to pay the salaries of the priests, but the priests had to promote loyalty towards amongst the people towards the state. So religion to Napoleon reintroduced the role of religion in French society and used it as an instrument to promote loyalty and discipline towards the French state. Similarly, in terms of social era also, you see the role of education. Napoleon was one of the few individuals who actually moved towards universalizing education. And he universalized and he was in favor of universalizing primary education in the 6 to 14 year age group. And that is something that he actually moves towards. At the same point of time, even while universalizing education, Napoleon again sees education is not a way of promoting the spirit of questioning, but promoting the spirit of loyalty to the state. So Napoleon was in favor, again being a military man, Napoleon was in favor of establishing military style schools in France, whose role was to promote loyalty towards the state. So again, even though he promoted education, he was not too much in promoting the spirit of questioning. Okay, so that's there. Now, I mean, you look at classrooms across us today as well. You know, people may say that they promote questioning, but they don't. Okay? And कई तो schools में तो खैर भूल ही जाइए. A for apple ही है, चाहे आपने apple देखा हो, चाहे नहीं देखा हो, चाहे खाया हो, चाहे नहीं खाया हो. Okay? So A और कुछ नहीं हो सकता, right? So the A is apple and B is ball. That's how it has been. That's how it's meant to be. Okay. So, pardon? Everywhere it's the same. Yeah. So I mean, it's the same pattern, right? So Napoleon again, why I'm saying this, why I'm telling you these points is because that's what we're supposed to write. That Napoleon on the one hand did bring about some break from the past, but on the other hand, if it was to promote the spirit of freedom and questioning, Napoleon's social policies did not promote that. If it was to restrict the role of religion, Napoleon reintroduced religion. Napoleon, even in the political structure, Napoleon introduced nepotism by instating his own relatives in Spain and Naples in Sicily. So again, Napoleon also promoted nepotism and not a genuine empowerment of people. Okay, and Napoleon also, apart from political and social policies, if you look at economics, again, Napoleon was the one who moved towards the Industrial Revolution in France. Napoleon is also the one who, again, in economic policies, imposed the continental system, which did hurt British interests, but ultimately ended up undermining Napoleon's rule itself. Okay, that's the economic policies. And again, you see Napoleon's army. Napoleon's army, though, was a strong army and played an important role in ensuring the continuation of Napoleon's rule in France and extension in Europe. It also was later affected by his policies of aggression, his overconfidence and poor planning, which ultimately resulted in the decline of his rule. Now, it's not somebody else who, ensured the fall of Napoleon. It was Napoleon himself who ensured his own downfall with his aggressiveness, with his over ambitions of ruling the whole of Europe, and also with his over confidence. There was no strong challenger to Napoleon. If only Napoleon would have been like Bismarck. I'm just to tell you from an interest point of view. Nobody's going to ask you to compare Napoleon and Bismarck. But if Napoleon only could have contained his desires and rather than causing havoc everywhere, could have tried to uphold only the revolution in France, he would probably have lasted longer. But Napoleon's over-ambition itself became his undoing. Okay? They can also give you a question like this. That it was Napoleon's over-ambitions which led to the ultimate downfall of his empire. Discuss. Right? That, what is that? Where do you witness Napoleon's over-ambitions? In the Battle of Trafalgar. The third and fourth European coalition are a result of Napoleon's over-ambitions. Not first and second, he is defending the French Revolution. Third and fourth, he is exporting the French Revolution. That is where it becomes the problem. So third and fourth, the Battle of Trafalgar, the continental system, the battle against Russia, all of them are a product of Napoleon's over-ambitions, which ultimately fueled the decline of the rule of Napoleon. Is that much clear? Okay. So that's something that we need to know. Let's write down this, then I'll show you a video. थोड़ा सा break हो जाएगा आप, right? So, the policies of Napoleon the political policies. Though Napoleon favored, or sorry, you can cut though. Napoleon favored the overthrow of monarchies across Europe. Napoleon favored the overthrow of monarchies across Europe and supported the idea of rule of people. But then Napoleon said, I am the voice of the people. Okay? So Napoleon says that the voice of the people is important and I am the voice of the people. Okay? Now, I mean, it's not that difficult to understand what he's doing. He's saying that the rule of the monarchy is bad, which everybody agrees. But then he's saying, and see, I am not a monarch. I was not born in a monarchical family. I was not a part of the first estate or the second estate. I am a commoner like you. And I am your voice. I am the chaiwala. I am not the Shehzada, right? So, you see that what enables the rise of Napoleon is the fact that yes, Napoleon is more talented than anybody else in France at this point of time. He is the one who rised from scratch in the French army. From his rise in the French army, he cemented his position within the French army, and from there he is becoming, a ruler in France when the whole of Europe had never seen ever in its history a ruler apart from a monarch, right? So he is the one who is not the royal blood, he is not the one who comes from a royal family, but he is instating a rule and then saying that I am the leader, I am the voice of the people. So Napoleon favored the overthrow of monarchies across Europe and supported the idea of rule of the people. He favored the establishment of nations which would unite common linguistic groups or territories into a single state. For example, Napoleon supported Polish, Italian, and German nationalist impulses because neither Poland nor Italy nor Germany had ever existed before this time. Okay, they were all fragmented under the rule of different monarchies. So, for example, Napoleon supported Polish, Italian, and German nationalist impulses across Europe. However, Napoleon betrayed many of these ideals himself by declaring himself as the first consul of France for life in 1802 to 1805. This is the period when he is actually declaring himself. But Napoleon, the argument was that I have been elected by the people because he did a plebiscite. Okay, to be fair to Napoleon, he did a plebiscite and people voted for him. Okay, but then he said that now it has been proved that I am the voice, so I'll be till there. Now that's there. Also, the first council for life, Napoleon favored the rise of nepotism by appointing his relatives to the throne in Spain and Sicily. Kingdom of Naples and Sicily is called also Sicily at times, or Kingdom of Naples and Sicily. It's one and the same thing, Sicily and Naples. So you see, you have to write positive as well as negative. Okay. Written? Then brought industrial revolution in France. To increase the industrial production, introduced the continental system, brought industrial revolution in France to increase the industrial production, introduced the continental system, to support French industries and undermine British economic interests. However, this ultimately ended up undermining Napoleon's rule itself. Okay, that's there. Fair enough. Okay, so the next written. Written? Then done now? So the next is the social policies. So when you look at the social policies again, though the French Revolution drastically reduced the role of church, Napoleon reintroduced the church within public life in France, reintroduced the church within public life in France with the Concordat signed between Church and Napoleon in 1801. The state paid the salaries of the priestly class to use the Catholic religion to promote loyalty and discipline, to promote loyalty towards the French state. So that's the first point. The second point is universalized primary education however, the focus of this education was to promote loyalty and discipline towards the state and not the spirit of reason or questioning. Women were not granted any right to vote. So that's also another thing. So what do you see both in political, in economic, in social, and also in the army? What do you see? That Napoleon's policies often betrayed, at least in political, economic, and social, you strongly see that Napoleon's policies often betrayed the ideas of the French Revolution. Now, I'm not writing the ideas of the French Revolution, वो हमने पहले लिखे हुए हैं. So if at all the question comes that Napoleon's policy often betrayed the ideas that it was meant to uphold, discuss, you firstly write in brief about a few lines on the ideas of French Revolution, then you write what were Napoleon's policy and how they partly upheld. But आपका conclusion इसमें ये होना चाहिए that Napoleon's policy though Napoleon's role though came with the promise of upholding the French Revolution, it more often than not undermined the ideas of the French Revolution. So यहाँ पे हम ये नहीं कहते हैं कि he upheld also and he he betrayed also. We say that though partly he did bring about a rebreak from the past, but he in the long run often failed to uphold the core ideas of the French Revolution that he himself professed to promote. That's what we say, okay, at the conclusion. Okay, so that's there. Now I've given some more points on all these topics also in your PowerPoint presentation, and so please go ahead and read it. Now, I'll show you a small video. We should make bigger washrooms. So basically, TED runs a series. TED is what? TED is, it's a kind of a platform where basically individual collaborators come together and make TED Ed. TED has many sections. TED Ed is only on education. So as they say, lessons worth sharing. Okay.
After the French Revolution erupted in 1789, Europe was thrown into chaos. Neighboring countries' monarchs feared they would share the fate of Louis XVI and attacked the new republic, while at home, extremism and mistrust between factions led to bloodshed. In the midst of all this conflict, a powerful figure emerged to take charge of France. But did he save the revolution or destroy it?
Order, order. Who's the defendant today? I don't see anyone.
Your Honor, this is Napoleon Bonaparte, the tyrant who invaded nearly all of Europe to compensate for his personal, stature-based insecurities. Actually, Napoleon was at least average height for his time. The idea that he was short comes only from British wartime propaganda. And he was no tyrant. He was safeguarding the young republic from being crushed by the European monarchies by overthrowing its government and seizing power himself. Your Honor, as a young and successful military officer, Napoleon fully supported the French Revolution and its ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity. But the revolutionaries were incapable of real leadership. Robespierre and the Jacobins who first came to power unleashed a reign of terror on the population with their anti-Catholic extremism and non-stop executions of everyone who disagreed with them. And the Directory that replaced them was an unstable and incompetent oligarchy. They needed a strong leader who could govern wisely and justly.
So, France went through that whole revolution just to end up with another all-powerful ruler?
Not quite. Napoleon's new powers were derived from the Constitution that was approved by a popular vote in the consulate. Ha! The Constitution was practically dictated at gunpoint in a military coup, and the public only accepted the tyrant because they were tired of constant civil war. Be that as it may, Napoleon introduced a new constitution and a legal code that kept some of the most important achievements of the revolution intact: freedom of religion, abolition of hereditary privilege, and equality before the law for all men. All men, indeed. He deprived women of the rights that the revolution had given them and even reinstated slavery in the French colonies. Haiti is still recovering from the consequences centuries later. What kind of equality is that? The only kind that could be stably maintained at the time, and still far ahead of France's neighbors.
Speaking of neighbors, what was with all the invasions?
Great question, Your Honor. Which invasions are we talking about? It was the neighboring empires who had invaded France, trying to restore the monarchy and prevent the spread of liberty across Europe. Twice by the time Napoleon took charge. Having defended France as a soldier and a general in those wars, he knew that the best defense is a good offense. An offense against the entire continent? Peace was secured by 1802, and other European powers recognized the new French regime. But Bonaparte couldn't rest unless he had control of the whole continent, and all he knew was fighting. He tried to enforce a European-wide blockade of Britain, invaded any country that didn't comply, and launched more wars to hold on to his gains. And what was the result? Millions dead all over the continent, and the whole international order shattered. You forgot the other result, the spread of democratic and liberal ideals across Europe. It was thanks to Napoleon that the continent was reshaped from a chaotic patchwork of fragmented feudal and religious territories into efficient, modern, and secular nation-states where the people held more power and rights than ever before. Should we also thank him for the rise of nationalism and the massive increase in army sizes? You can see how well that turned out a century later.
So what would European history have been like if it weren't for Napoleon?
Unimaginably better. Napoleon's seemingly unstoppable momentum would die in the Russian winter snows, along with most of his army. But even after being deposed and exiled, he refused to give up, escaping from his prison and launching a bold attempt at restoring his empire before being defeated for the second and final time. Bonaparte was a ruler full of contradictions, defending a popular revolution by imposing absolute dictatorship and spreading liberal ideals through imperial wars. And though he never achieved his dream of conquering Europe, he undoubtedly left his mark on it, for better or for worse.
So, so again, you see, I mean, there's no easy way to look at Napoleon. It's not that sir अच्छा है कि बुरा है मुझको नहीं पता, ठीक है? Ultimately, from our examination point of view, we are saying that he does a lot of things, but he also undoes a lot of things, and so his rule is marked by a series of contradictions. And if one has to conclude, one could say that the ideas of the French Revolution would have not found a place in Europe had Napoleon not been there. But at the same point of time, Napoleon also undermined some of the ideas that he was supposed to be professing. That's it. Khatam. Okay. So, any doubts still here? Why do you all look so drained? Do you have a class before this also? No. I mean, how many of you are taking the, do you have some optional class or anything before this? Okay. So, I mean, because what I'm trying to understand is why do you look to all zapped out? Right? You're like, sir, bus. Right? So, should we continue forward? Okay. So the next thing that we're talking about, I'll not extend it too much, 10-15 minutes. Now, don't give contradictory voices, okay? Now that you've granted the approval, I have the approval. Now, so basically when we look, the next topic that we're talking about is Congress of Vienna, okay? Now the Congress of Vienna, again, is an important question from your mains examination point of view. And talking about the Congress of Vienna, firstly, just a brief background of this conference. The background of this conference is that in 1815, what you see is the coming in of the quadruple alliance. The coming in of the quadruple alliance. देखिए quadruple alliance क्या है? The quadruple alliance are all the players who came together in the war against France in the fourth coalition. Which are the four major players here? This is Britain, this is France, this is Britain, this is Russia, this is Prussia and Austria. They are the quadruple alliance. So once they've defeated Napoleon, the question is, what is to be done with the whole mess that is left behind after Napoleon? Okay, and so that is what is to be decided. Also, what is to be decided is what is to be done about France. Okay, what is to be done about France? Now, basically, in Britain, in Prussia, in Russia, in Austria, everywhere there is a monarchy. Okay, and what is the main aim of the Congress of Vienna is firstly to bring peace to Europe, which had been dealing with these 20 years of war fighting since the 1790s till 1815. The first thing that the aim is to bring was to bring peace both between states and within states. The understanding of the Congress of Vienna was that peace had to be restored both between states and within states. And how could this be done? This could be done firstly between states is by bringing war fighting to an or fighting to an end. And for this, what needs to be done is that you need to bring an end to hostilities. Okay. For bringing peace within states, what you need to do is take care of all this domestic turmoil, which a number of states were dealing with. For achieving both these aims, to achieve stability and peace between states and within states, what was needed was a strong monarchical rule. Okay. That this whole myth, Napoleon's experience convinced the European leaders that all this idea of democracy, popular rule, voice to the people is something that promotes instability and chaos. You have to understand that before this time, Europe has never in its whole history ever seen a popular rule. And what Europe has always experienced is our monarchies. Good monarchies, bad monarchies, but only monarchies. So, the first experience that happens with a form of a semi-popular government after the French Revolution in Europe is not a very peaceful one. Rather, it sees the rise of an individual who is hell-bent on destroying the established order, and that is Napoleon, right? So the understanding is that we should restore peace in Europe And for restoring peace in Europe, what we need is a monarchy, because monarchies mean a common, constant, strong, stable rule. Monarchies are one which Europe has always been familiar with and which has worked for Europe. Also, a strong monarchy will also be able to establish peace within the state. Okay, so it was Napoleon who was, left, right, center, imposing so many wars on Europe. So having a monarchy would also, on the one hand, establish peace between states, but also within the states, where you will not see any popular uprising. And if at all there is a popular uprising, it could be crushed by a strong ruler. So the first aim of the Congress of Vienna is to establish peace between states and within states. And for that, what is needed is the reinstatement of monarchy everywhere where Napoleon had tried to establish a so-called leader of the people. So France में जहाँ से तब चालू हुआ, so reinstate the rule of the Bourbons or the Bourbon dynasty. Similarly, in Spain and in Naples and Sicily, reinstate the rule of the Bourbon dynasty. Right? So that was the idea. And this is what was the first thing that was to be achieved. Also, in the Congress of Vienna, one of the understandings was that Napoleon had to be punished, not France. It was not the rulers of France who were at fault. The rulers, or the original rulers of the France for the Bourbon dynasty, which were not at fault. The fault was of Napoleon. So Napoleon has to be kept out. It did not mean that France had to be demolished. It only meant that France had to be made stable. And for making France stable, you needed to put the Bourbon dynasty back in place. Also, the understanding was that to restore peace in France, also what was needed was a relatively stable distribution of power. What was the reality was that under Napoleon's rule, France was by far the biggest power in continental Europe. There was no challenge to France except the one from Britain. Right? Except the one from Britain, there was no power which could challenge France on its own. So the balance of power in the region was heavily tilted in the favor of France, and that is what allowed Napoleon to believe that he could impose his terms and conditions on any other European power with ease. So one of the things that basically the Congress of Vienna pointed out was that the balance of power in Europe had already been extremely upset. Why? Because France was way powerful than all other countries. And so if peace was needed in Europe, what you also needed was a balance of power, where other states are also made strong enough so that in future, if France tries to reattempt what was attempted by Napoleon, there is no easy way that France can easily defeat its neighbors like Prussia, Austria. Okay? So for this, what happens is that a number of territories that Napoleon had acquired outside France were taken away from France. Okay? That we'll talk about in detail later in the next class. Okay? But I'm just telling it to you that, for example, you look at China. If China is a strong economy today, it's a strong military, you see that the balance of power in the Asia-Pacific region is heavily in the favor of China. And that is likely to lead to a situation, or can lead to a situation, where China tries to assert its power because it knows that the balance of power is heavily in its favor. Okay, so one other thing that the European monarchy said, that it is not just important to reinstate monarchy in France, it's also important to ensure that France does not become so powerful that it again can militarily threaten its neighbors. So that is also one of the ideas, to restore the balance of power in France. And also, if to defeat Napoleon, countries like Russia, countries like Prussia, empires like Russia, Prussia and Austria had faced a huge financial and military cost, they must also be rewarded for this effort against Napoleon. Or the principle of rewarding victor powers was one of the principles that was followed in this conference. The other principle was the principle of restoring the balance of power in Europe. The balance of power meant that territories of Napoleon were to be, or the territories acquired by Napoleon were to be redistributed amongst the other European powers. And also, while redistributing these territories, the principle of rewarding the victor powers was also to be kept in mind. So there were there are two principles I told you: the principle of rewarding victor powers, the principle of restoring the balance of power. And the third principle also I have told you, and that is the principle of legitimacy, that not anybody has the right to rule. The right to rule is only the divine right to rule that belongs to the monarchy or the monarchical sections of the society. And that is the principle of legitimacy. That only, not anybody can become a ruler. Only those who have the legitimate right, and the legitimate right is the divine right. So basically, what you see in Europe at this point of time is, what is the Congress of Vienna trying to do? Restore Europe to a pre-1789 position. Restore Europe to a situation as if Napoleon never came. As if the ideas of the French Revolution never came. It was to turn the clock backwards on Europe to the pre-1789. That is why the Congress of Vienna came into existence. Okay. So we'll write in the next class, don't worry. Okay. And there are more points actually which are to be discussed here. This is just the broad objective and the members of the Congress of Vienna that I've told you. But to what extent, what were the exact steps taken, which territories went to which power, that I've not told you. And also to what extent the Congress of Vienna was successful in achieving its objectives. That's something that we'll talk about. But the three principles is, the overall objective is this. This is the objective, to restore peace. The overall objective is to restore peace and bring about stability in Europe between states as well as within states. And the principles on which are to be followed to achieve this objective are the principle of legitimacy, or the principle of restoring the monarchical rule, the principle of restoring the balance of power, and the principle of rewarding the victorious powers. Okay. So we'll carry forward the discussion from the